Is for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Is for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Hi, everybody. I am going to address a subject that's near and dear to my heart as a regular old human being having an experience, as well as a therapist. And I'm going to use the word gaslighting, and I know that that word is out there all the time, and a lot of times people misuse it. A lot of times people who use it are just people that got called on their BS and they're not willing to admit that they've got BS. And lots of times people are being gaslit, and we need to be careful about whether we mean truly intentionally gaslit or just people or society not understanding, or let's say, for example, you have a kid who has parents who are very negative and reactive, and they'll talk negatively about their child, and their child hasn't really done anything wrong. They're just a normal child. And then they go to school, and the teachers who have had multiple conversations with the parents setting the kid up, address the kid and say, hey, look, we know you have some behavior problems, but, blah, blah, blah. That sort of thing, some people will call that gaslighting, because essentially that kid's true lived reality isn't in anybody's head. And in fact, the authorities in the situation are coming to him or her and talking to him or her as if they are a part of some false reality. That's not literally gaslighting, but it has the same effect, right? It's the same outcome. I think originally gaslighting came from a movie. I think I'm telling this secondhand from learning it in psychology, in the psychology program, but it came from a situation where a widower with money is being courted by this man without good intentions, and he wants her money, but he doesn't want her. And so he rigs the gas lights to kind of flicker on and off and to go on and off. And every time this woman remarks like, hey, isn't that weird? Like the lights keep sort of flickering on and off, right? He'll do this number. What? The lights, isn't it weird that they keep flickering on and off? They didn't flicker on and off at all, but I'll watch. And then she comments on it again. And then, again, he's like, are you feeling okay? And so in this way, someone can slowly start undermining another person's reality testing, their own sense that they're of sound mind, that they are perceiving what they're perceiving, and that what they perceive is reliable, that they're processing what reality is and how they feel, and what they perceive is solid. And so if I remember correctly, what happens in the movie is this guy slowly plays with this woman's head until she loses it, and he hospitalizes her and takes some money. I don't know. I don't remember, but I assume that would be the outcome if you're writing the script. But the point is the same. True gaslighting is an intentionally playing with someone's perceptions, what they're experiencing, over and over until that person starts to question their own perception of reality and they slowly get broken down. Some people do this in order to gain control. So after a while, it's like, what I say is true, not what you say, so you should listen to me. So some people are doing it to gain control. Some people are doing it to literally destroy someone else, to get them out of the way. Some people do it in order to escape being punished for something they did, right? So someone who sexually assaults someone and then realizes, holy shit, I had too much to drink, I did something really bad, could do this to a man or a woman, right? The woman could come forward and be really shaky and be like, I know I had some drinks, but I know I didn't say yes to this person, and I was screaming, no, please stop, and they force themselves on me. And the person who did it can slowly start making little comments that bring into question the victim's perception of reality. Of like, I don't watch, I'm going to do it right now. I was at the same party, but I literally never talked to her. You know, there were some people doing like snorting a little bit of heroin or whatever, and I saw her go in a room with somebody. So I assumed that maybe she did, but I don't know. Like I didn't interact with her. So this is sneaky, right? This is sociopathic. Doing something like that, the person A has not just pled innocent and gone, no, I didn't do that. No, she's full of crap. I didn't do that. The person is literally embodied and expressed emotions and psychological states that communicate like, I have no idea what this person's talking about, and even further offer evidence that would suggest that the victim was heavily influenced by, say, heroin, and is an unreliable narrator, is unreliable as a source of their own experience, right? So then the person who assaulted her or him starts slowly chipping away, maybe admits that they were at the party, but it's like, I never even talked to that person, you know, et cetera, et cetera. With forensics now, that probably wouldn't fly. There'd probably be some DNA evidence, but the point is the mechanism, right? That's gaslighting. Okay, so that's a little bit about gaslighting, but that's just a tool. And I'm going to talk more about unintentional gaslighting that society does to victims and the reason for that. And one of the reasons for that, especially happens with men who have been raised, generations of us, this is changing somewhat, but generations of us have been raised that it's embarrassing or shameful to share that you were victimized. There are so many men who get victimized who never talk about it because it's considered shameful or embarrassing. At a level that maybe, I don't know, I'm not a woman. I know women feel intense shame or embarrassment often if they're assaulted. They feel that they should have done something differently, or they feel that it's their fault. Men, it's to an extreme where it's like, they shouldn't even admit that it happened, period. Forget about fault, forget about like the fact that it happened, your fault. Doesn't matter, like, you shouldn't have been a whatever, right? So as an outcome of this, and this does happen with women too, as an outcome of this, when men and women also try to talk about difficult experiences, especially with parents, I experienced this for a long time as a therapist. You can have one person come in and go, you know, I do suffer a little bit on and off depression. I mean, I've never felt suicidal, but it's challenging, and people have recommended that I go to therapy, and I think I probably should. And you explore it, and it's like, well, do you have some idea of, you know, were you born that way? Is there a predisposition in your family? Did you have some negative experiences? Did you maybe lack some of the love and support that some people get from parents? What was it? And they might say something like, well, yeah, I mean, my mom was kind of cold. Like, she wasn't the traditional, like, she was a good mom, but, you know, she wasn't the traditional kind of mom. She wasn't like the warm and fuzzy mom. And dad could be rough. Dad could be rough. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's has something to do with it. Okay. And almost everybody will go, well, yeah, I mean, maybe rough dad means one day dad lost his temper because his son broke a tool that had been warned 3 times not to use, and grabbed him by the arm and dragged him in the room and gave him a whipping. Oh, it's like, okay, now, like, corporal punishment is off the table. We know that it's not healthy, but we also go, well, given those generations, and yeah, that's not an abusive father. If that father also played ball and went to his son's games and every once in a while was like, I love you, son. And we're like, well, okay, or, maybe he was kind of negative or withdrawn. So I could see that you get kind of depressed. And most people will compress someone else's report into some facsimile, some version of what seems explicable, what seems explainable, what seems somehow that fits into the human condition as we know it. When people hear other stories, like I forget, there was the family in California that had like 5, 8 kids or something, and the kids were finally rescued because they would chain them to their beds for years. They would not be allowed out. They didn't feed them properly. There were horrible medical, nutritional, emotional, psychological issues with what those parents did. Everyone hears that, and it's just sort of like this nightmare situation that it's like, okay, you hear this story, but it just becomes this sensational story that, oh my God, it's terrible. Like, I just can't imagine, like, why, I don't know. It's just terrible. Some people are just evil, right? And then society does that, and that gets put over there. There are people, lots of people, who have childhoods that bad or almost that bad, who will come into therapy and they'll present with pretty significant, like I can just see sitting there looking at them, that they're very, very tightly, they hold themselves very tightly. They've learned to sort of look relaxed. Like right now, I'm tensing my back muscles, but I'm sort of relaxing my face and just going, right? So you can carry this tension and this PTSD around, but people who have been born and raised in chaos learn to present in a way that is not disturbing to other people and learn to do their jobs and be functional and whatever. And so you wouldn't just look at them and know. Therapists tend to, trauma-trained therapists, like you can look and see, like this person is tightly wound, and nobody just invents that. Nobody's just born tightly wound. And so you ask that person about their childhood, and they'll be like, well, yeah, I guess mom, was not the typical warm fuzzy. I mean, she was a good mother, but yeah, not super, wasn't like tons of hugs or whatever. And dad could be pretty rough, for sure. Yeah, maybe it was not the best. And yet you'll see in this person, they'll report, well, I've had this history of severe addiction, and I climbed out of an alcohol addiction, and I used to have a rage problem, and I really struggled. I struggled to keep a job and blah, blah, blah. But they blame all of that on themselves. Now, here's the thing. They're reporting in exactly the same language. This happens all the time. They're reporting in exactly the same language. And if people are like, well, what was your childhood like? You get really depressed and you were suicidal for a while, and like, what's going on? They'll just say, even when they try to talk about it, they'll say, well, my dad was pretty rough. I mean, it was pretty bad. Especially men talk this way. It's pretty rough. It was pretty bad. I guess dad could be rough, and mom was not warm and fuzzy. Okay. If you're a therapist and it's your job, you just see the symptoms and this is not the same thing as somebody who was neglected a little bit and struggled and got bullied in middle school and has some anxiety and some issues and needs to heal. Not being dismissive, those things can have significant impact. But the point is there's this difference in language that leaves society sort of, it's very easy for them to compress into a much milder version. So with that client, you dig in, you get under the hood, and very slowly, and these are some of the issues that these people have. If you have severe trauma, unprocessed trauma, people's narrative and language around it can be very fragmented. They lose a sense of linear time. This is what extreme cortisol and adrenaline does, is sometimes people have a hard time even remembering because they dissociated a lot in their childhood. It's always significant when somebody comes in and goes, Yeah, I don't remember a lot from my childhood. Man, there is no such thing unless you were being pretty severely neglected or abused, because childhood is the most indelible part of our life ever. Children are wide open and they're recording everything, and everything they experience, they feel it very, very deeply, and they're deeply engaged. And it's like, for the rest of our lives as adults, we're like, oh, I wish ice cream tasted the way it tasted when I was a child. And I wish I had as much fun with my friends as I did when I was a child, and how effortless it was, and how much joy, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, if you don't remember your childhood, that is a significant trauma statement. Maybe there's some organic medical issue. Maybe you have terrible long-term memory, or maybe you suffered a couple of concussions that have nothing to do with trauma. There can be some other things, but mostly that's a very significant statement, right? So people who suffer pretty severe childhood trauma have difficulty with narrative. And so even when they try to talk about what happened to them, they'll be vague. It'll be very abstract. It'll be a bit confused. They'll break off in the middle. Yeah, I guess there was this one time, I think, my dad hit me, and I'm going, what does that mean? Like, some old school dad whacked you upside the head, pulled his punch? Well, that's not good, but it's not terrible. Or did he make a fist and with rage punch you in the face and break a tooth and give you a bloody nose? Those are two very, very different things. Very different things. But society, we're still at a primitive enough level that when people have pretty serious mental health experiences, our first assumption is, oh, that inheres in you. It's just too bad. And look, I've addressed this before. Big Pharma loves this shit because they make money off of convincing you that it's just a chemical imbalance. It is the biggest crock of bullshit on the face of the planet. It is a frickin' lie. It's a lie. I'm not going to go down that road because I get really pissed. It's such bullshit. And you have a chemical imbalance. Shut the fuck up. Unless you're my client and you believe that, and then I'm sorry, I'm being so opinionated. I'm pissed at Big Pharma, not at you. It's such a crock. So society still has this tendency to look at people with severe outcomes and difficult mental health outcomes, and it's just easier to go, well, that's about them. Well, they probably had it hard, but they were a sensitive soul, and where other people would have borne up under it, but no, it's bullshit. What happens is some people experience things that they don't know how to talk about, and because it feels disturbing to us to really go, man, it makes me sick to my stomach what really happened to that person. Why that person is homeless and I'm not is a level of pain and suffering and chaos and misery was put on them that you cannot imagine. So it's difficult for people to relate their narrative. It's difficult for society. Society's already predisposed. We don't want to believe that it's really that bad, and how often it's really that bad. How often parents are out and out sociopaths, or they behave sociopathically with their children because their children trigger something so deep and vulnerable in them that they might seem a semi-genuine, decent person out in the world. And this also people don't understand. Lots and lots of incredibly abusive parents don't give any hint that they're that crazy with their own kids because they know better. I often think about when I was observing classrooms, I interviewed a teacher who was very shaken up because the day before she had had a meeting, teacher-parent conference, to discuss one of her students, and we're talking about like a third grader, right? A baby, a kid. And in response to her saying, well, he does have a problem with talking too much and we need to work on that, blah, 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 the father just hauled off and kicked and punched his son until his son was curled in a ball in the corner. Now you can understand that that teacher was deeply disturbed and they had to call the police and report it to, whatever. But here's the thing, I'm going to make a crazy statement. That kid's the lucky kid because his dad is dumb enough to not understand that society looks askance at that you can't punch and kick. How old are you when you're in third grade? 9, 8 or 9, maybe 10. Like, it's just a kid. It's a baby. Like, society's not going to stand for that. But the one thing you can say for that father is he obviously grew up in that, and he was really doing something that he thought that the teacher would sign off on. In fact, he was probably scared and probably showing, I'm not going to put up with this shit. Like, if you have a problem with my child, I'm going to handle it. That kid's the lucky one. Most parents know that society does not accept the way they behave and has strong opinions about it. Now, they might make up shit like, well, they're going to raise a bunch of weaklings and that's what's happening to this country today. But like, they'll tell themselves some bullshit sentiment to make it okay that, they get their kid up at 5 a.m. and force him or her to hold heavy books out at arm's length for 45 minutes. And if they begin shaking, then they whip and punch and beat their kid because they're toughening them. Like, yeah, parents do sick shit. Like, way more people than you think do sick shit like that and hide it. And those kids tend not to talk about it because nobody gets it. So here's another component that I'm going to add to this before I come right to the core of how these victims get gaslit because of the way they talk about their trauma. Go back to Dr. Phil, right? And I think it was the Cash Me Outside girl. I remember on Sally Jesse Raphael, there was a case of like a 13-year-old girl who was prostituting herself, and her mom was sitting there on the show with this downtrodden look and like, oh, see, she just bullies me and she cusses me out and blah, blah, blah. And society was still primitive enough to buy that bullshit. That was a horrible mother. Children develop these adult coping mechanisms and attitude, and they absolutely rebel against authority when authority is not safe and authority is weak and authority has abused them and proven over and over and over that authority does not have their best interests at heart and is not going to take care of them. That's when you get kids who are like, yeah, mom, go fuck yourself. Fuck you. What are you going to do? And society still thinks that they should hire a drill sergeant to get in that kid's face. Oh, you think so? You think so? Yeah. Yeah, son, you think so? No, you fucking asshole. That's a kid who's being abused. Every time, that's a kid who's being abused. And society is still primitive enough to think that we need to posture up on that kid. How do you think that kid got that way? Because they had good parents? So then society is like, well, your parents kicked the shit out of you, and just to show you who's boss, we're going to treat you like shit too. Society gaslights victims. Gaslights victims. Child victims. Yeah, you, Dr. Phil. While your ego needs to prove that you're in control and you have mastery of the situation and you're a psychologist, you're sitting there signing off on a completely negligent and abusive mother who has totally dumped all her shit on her child and turned that child into an angry, aggressive, whatever. And then society's like, yeah, we're not going to take that from you, child. It's so primitive and so stupid, I don't even know how to wrap my brain around it. It's so primitive and so gross and so stupid. I don't even know how to wrap my brain around it. Right? So let's come back to, so there's that, right? Child victims especially get gaslit because children act out. Children translate all their hurt into anger, abrasiveness, sarcasm, posturing, rage at authority figures, et cetera, et cetera. That's what kids do. Or they get really sick, or they get really anxious, or they like whatever. There are all of these really poor outcomes for them. And society is just like, yeah, it's kids' fault. Let's put the pressure on them. Let's put them in detention. Let's blah, blah, blah. We're still so primitive as a society. I remember one case in particular where I was observing at an elementary school. I have mush mouth today. I don't know why. I'm a little tired. I was observing at an elementary school, and there was an office administrator, a couple office administrators talking about one of their second graders or whatever. It was a kid who's like maybe 7 or 8 who had lost his temper and like choked his mom, wrapped his hands around his mom's throat and squeezed. And again, duh, where do you think he learned that? Either he's seen his dad do it, or his mom is being so cruel and shitty to him that there's a rage that comes up in that kid where he just turns into a little animal and is just like, I don't care anymore. Kids have to be pushed to the point where they don't care about their own well-being anymore, and they will become violent against adults. A child who is violent against adults has already been pushed past their breaking point so many times that they don't care that they're going to lose. They don't care. When you see that, if that makes you angry and you're like, that little shit, like okay, you're the problem, because that's a child who's being neglected and abused terribly, right? So in that case with the child who choked his mom, the office administrator was saying, some people, you never know, they're just like born with a demon, like just born evil. So this primitive asswipe is taking a situation with a kid who's obviously badly distressed. We're talking about like a 7 or 8-year-old. And there's some bad shit happening at home, not instituted by the child. And that adult is like, oh, the kid is born evil. Okay, way to dodge responsibility. Way to dodge responsibility for having to go interact with that kid's parents and to intercede and go, man, something really bad is happening to this kid. Kids do not react with rage and violence against authority figures unless they're being badly neglected or abused to the point that they no longer value their own safety. They know they're going to lose. They know it. They know they're going to lose, and they just don't give a shit anymore. Like, how badly do you have to treat a 7-year-old to get them to that point? You have to abuse them really badly. Yeah. I know all the people, oh, yeah, it's just, I'll blame the parent and nobody takes responsibility. No, you dumbass. Kids aren't responsible for what adults do to them. It's amazing how people will lecture about how kids should learn responsibility and completely dodge the fact that the adults in the situation have not taken responsibility. Nice dodge. Let's come back to the less incendiary part of it, the part that doesn't make me as mad, right? Around language, why victims get gaslit because of how they talk about what they experience. Go back to the guy who says, well, you're the one guy who says, yeah, dad was kind of rough and mom was not super warm and fuzzy. has some anxiety and on and off depressions here and there, never been suicidal, et cetera, versus the guy who fought out of a 10-year drunk, had severe anger issues, was badly suicidal, maybe checked into an ER or was hospitalized at some point, whatever, who also says, yeah, dad could be pretty rough and mom was not the most warm and fuzzy. And that man will have difficulty reporting and talking about what he grew up in because a lot of it gets erased or scrambled by cortisol. People go, well, how can you trust? You don't have to trust what they say. The cortisol tells you if their memory got erased by cortisol, then you know something really bad happened. You don't even need to describe it. You don't need that person to remember. People don't just have a massive flood of adrenaline and cortisol so intense that their narrative and their memory of it is fragmented and some of it erased. That only happens through severe abuse and severe trauma. So the fact that they can't really narrate what happened to them is irrelevant unless you're into blaming the victim. I'm not. I'd like to identify the real problem and for society to be better. So that guy, if you work with him very gently, not being overly woo-woo and emotional because that scares really traumatized people, especially men, but just warm and just inviting, yeah, it's okay, being a bit scientific, you know what, these things happen if you experience these sort of things. This level of PTSD that I'm seeing, maybe things were a little bit more serious. I don't know. I don't want to impose my interpretation on your experience. You don't have to worry about the therapist leading that person, because once they open up, it'll be like, yeah, I mean, dad used to get really drunk and come home and come up the stairs and drag me out of the bed by my hair and scream at me over and over, you fucking worthless piece of shit, you fucking worthless piece of shit. And one time he really lost it and threw me down the stairs and I broke my arm. And my mom took me to the hospital and told them it was an accident. I just tripped and fell down the stairs. And when they asked me, I nodded yes, because if I told the truth, mom would have lied to them and said I was making it up and that I'm the kind of person who makes stuff up. When the truth comes out, you're like, oh yeah, that would do it. Have had chronic severe PTSD? That would do it. That would do it. Severe problem with addiction? That would do it. Felt suicidal, wanted to end your life? Well, having parents who not only didn't give a shit about you, but were willing to use you to dump all their rage on, and they didn't give a shit what it did to you, that would do it. That would do it. Right? So here's the worst part that society does to these people. Let's say they finally do get to the point that they can talk about it. They might try to discuss it with a friend. Be like, well, I've been going to therapy and trying to deal with some stuff. Oh, really? What's going on? Well, I know everybody likes my dad, but truth is he drank pretty hard and used to scream at me a lot. What do you mean scream at you? What does that mean? Well, he would, get drunk, call me a fucking piece of shit, scream at me. One time he threw me down the stairs and I broke my arm. Now there are friends who are going to be shocked and just be like, oh my God, I'm sorry. And they don't really know what to say if they didn't grow up with that kind of abuse. But they'll just kind of go like, well, okay. But folks, you would be shocked at how many people will immediately start rewriting what that person said and rewriting it in their head because they can't deal with it. How many people will be like, what did your mom think happened? And when people ask questions like that, the victim of the trauma knows that that person is not exploring what the experience is. They're asking questions to try to find evidence that it wasn't really as bad as what the victim said. So, but your mom knew, right? I mean, would she let that kind of stuff happen? People say shit like that. They make it blindingly clear that they can't just take what that victim said and go, oh my God, that's horrible. They want more evidence, but they want the evidence to tell them that it's not as bad as the victim is telling them. And so they'll say stuff like that. Well, are you sure that, was it just like, was he have like maybe lost his job or having a bad, like they just can't accept that some people have parents who act that way across their entire childhood. Some people have parents who act that way across their entire childhood. It's way more common than you think it is. And those parents who act like that will lie about it till the day they die. And they will act like decent, upstanding people in the community. And everybody in the community will be like, I don't, there's no way. Like, I know his dad. Like, yeah, you know, he was in the military, he saw combat, you know, he might be a little rough. Maybe he had a drinking problem, but come on. And we'll gaslight the fuck out of that person. And first of all, parents who abuse like that gaslight their children and will swear up and down that they never did anything like that. And that mother will stick to that story. You tripped. I know that your dad was drinking and yelling at you, but you were trying to get away from him and you tripped, and you probably thought, you know, that he pushed you, but he didn't. Your dad would never do that. I promise you, there are mothers who cover, and there are fathers who cover for a violent and abusive spouse and will sacrifice, they will throw their abused child under the bus to maintain the peace and not have to face into, oh my God, I'm married to an abusive, crazy person and I'm going to have to do something about it. I'm going to have to protect my child. And so they will lie about it. You have no idea how common this is. Am I saying it's the majority? No. Most people are good parents, loving people, doing the best they can. But there are way more severely abusive parents than society thinks. And when their victims come out and try to talk about it, people are like, oh my God, it's another person. It's like every parent abuses their kids now because standards changed and my dad was rough too. We got beaten with a belt. We got spanked. But when they say they got spanked, it's not even close to the same thing. It'd be like, yeah, you know, when they really screwed up and they stole dad's car and went out joyriding and drinking, dad was really pissed. And he brought them in the room and he gave them a good whipping, which again, we don't believe in anymore. But that father who also went to their games and told them that he loved them and gave them hugs, blah, 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 is not even close to the same fucking thing. Not even close. And so that person, because it's too disturbing to really face or admit how common this is, how many victims of this kind of parenting there are, that person will immediately compress it into their own statement and their own experience. Well, my dad was pretty rough. Yeah, maybe. Maybe that time he was really pissed, he dragged you in your room and whipped you with the belt and it hurt. Maybe it even left a bruise. You are not even talking about the same thing as the person who was a target anytime his dad had a bad day, having nothing to do with him. Nothing. He could just expect to be beaten, bruised, cursed at, and treated like a piece of shit on any random day that out of control father couldn't deal with his own rage and couldn't deal with his own trauma and couldn't deal with his own shit. Random and arbitrary. And this person who compresses it into like, well, a lot of parents were rough, but has no fucking idea what that other person is talking about when they say, yeah, my dad was pretty rough and my mom was pretty cold, right? His mom is straight out lying through her teeth and protecting her husband rather than protect her own child. And he has to grow up with that festering inside of him too. Maybe mom didn't beat me, but mom literally did not allow me to protect myself. The few times I gathered enough courage to say, this is happening to me, she lied and she handled the situation and she told that teacher or she told those people, well, he tends to exaggerate and, blah, blah, blah. You have no idea how common this is. And how often those people get gaslit by well-meaning people who feel disturbed by what they're describing. When that person was like, you don't get it. Like, he was always angry. He was like, and then he'll start losing it because, right, his trauma comes up and he gets overwhelmed by cortisol as he tries to describe the fact that his father was this raging maniac who you could never trust. You didn't know. Like, you could just come home from school and do your homework and be sitting there quietly doing your homework. And he would come home angry and start picking on you and kicking your chair. You little shit. Oh, you think you're smart? Whack, smack him upside the head. Dad, stop it. You're telling me what to do. Wham, wham, and just goes off on him. That's what he experienced. But these people who experience this other thing over here don't want to deal with how disturbing it feels. And so they just compress it into their own experience. It's fucked up because those people get gaslit over and over and over. And they're already struggling with having internalized the denial that their parents used to control them to make sure this truth never got out. So they're struggling to remember and tell their own story. A trauma therapist can look at their symptoms and go, you don't need to tell me anything. Like, nobody's just born with a nervous system that makes them want to kill themselves. Ever. It's always a severe attachment wounding and a severe lack in the parenting. Now, it's not always abusive parents, right? There can be cases, I've said this before when I worked in, did data collection in elementary schools, in new immigrant communities. LAUSD was doing a really good job, but they would have drop off at like 6:30. And then the school had a program to feed the children breakfast and then let them sit in the classroom and play until class starts. And then these are just elementary school kids. They would go all the way to 2:30, and then they would have an after school program, and then they would have an after school program, because these were immigrant parents who were both working 6 and 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So those children were going through severe lacking attachment nutrition, but it's not because the parents were abusive. They were just completely overwhelmed new immigrants navigating a new country, new language, however they got here, they had no wherewithal, right? So it's not always abusive parents, but nobody's just born with a nervous system that at age 30, they're just like, I'm just offing myself. Like, I just don't want to be here. I've never seen it. I haven't interviewed the whole goddamn human race, but I've never seen it. And I've been watching and paying attention for decades, and I've been a therapist for over a decade now. Never seen it. So these people get gaslit. And when they try to talk about it, first they don't talk about it because it's painful and difficult, and there's lots of shame that comes with being abused and neglected and rejected in childhood by your parents. And the parents also installed all of this denial and shame and all of these rules. You're a pussy if you talk about it. Oh, you're ungrateful. What kind of son, what kind of daughter would turn on their own parents, and then the parents will turn themselves into victims? That happens all the time. Those kinds of parents will turn themselves into a victim in a heartbeat. That's why I'm talking about the Sally Jesse Raphael situation, or the Dr. Phil situation, where there's a mother they'll sit there and just be like, he bullies me, she bullies me. You're full of shit. You are a crappy mother who's abused and neglected your child until they turned into a monster they needed to be to survive your lack of parenting. Now you're badly traumatized. I sympathize, I empathize. I'm sorry for whatever you went through, but the point at which you turn around and act like you're a victim to the child that you're abusing and neglecting, go fuck yourself. I don't play that shit. Not down for that. I'm not spiritual about that. Not interested. And society is still gaslighting these victims. Right? So you have this guy, he talks about these things, he uses that language. Even once he's able to talk about it, he's a little shaky, he feels ashamed, he can't look the person in the eyes. Yeah, like my dad would get drunk and come home and call me a fucking worthless piece of shit. And one time he got really mad and threw me down the stairs and broke my arm. And people will see the stuttering and the ashamed, and they just make shit up in their head because they don't want to believe it. They don't want to deal with it. Or it'll become cartoonish. It'll just become a story like, oh my God, yeah, like I talked to this guy, I can't believe it. His life was so fucking bad. Oh, that's crazy. Really? If you understood the pain and the suffering that that person went through, would you be talking about it like it's a fucking cartoon? You wouldn't. You're full of shit. You lack empathy. You're a little crazy. If you think it's okay to sensationalize those sorts of things. And I've done it, so don't let me get too judgmental. And people, I've sensationalized my own story before I really got in touch with how painful and how crazy it was. And then you realize, man, like I'm gaslighting myself. I'm sensationalizing my own story to try to elicit sympathy or understanding. And I'm the one who doesn't understand. I don't understand how bad it was. It is in this way that we gaslight victims, especially children, but even as adults when they come and talk about it. The first challenge is they don't know how to talk about it. They've been gaslit by their parents, and so they talk about it in the same language that the other guy talks about it, who just got a whipping every once in a while when he actually did something wrong, right? So this person who was randomly and arbitrarily beaten and abused and cussed out and treated like worse than a dog will talk about it in the same language. Yeah, my dad could be pretty rough, and I guess my mom was not the warm and fuzzy type, a little cold. And once he or she starts talking about it, the shakiness and the difficulty with the narrative, and also people's deep, intense need and desire to not deal with how profoundly disturbing it is, that this is not that uncommon. You go into a room with 100 people, 10 of them have childhoods that bad or near it. I'm guessing, but it's nuts. What some people have to live through and then try to live a normal life and try to function and try to overcome what they lived through. It's nuts, right? So you have that they can't talk about it. Then they try to talk about it, but they look all shaky and they have all of these mental health issues. And so people are like, well, but I think, there's some mental health issues there. But when they say that, what they mean is it's not really a result of trauma. Maybe there was some, but somebody else would have been fine. Yeah, go fuck yourself. You have no understanding of what's going on in that situation. And sometimes with just genuine good intention, people who were not treated that way by their parents ever, and their parents were loving, and most of the people they associated had loving parents, blah, 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 they just can't register it. Like it can't sink in the nightmare and the horror that some people grow up under that don't end up in prison and don't kill themselves and are not walking around punching the first person who bumps into them, that present as normal, functional people, are high functioning, have good jobs, and blah, 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 but they struggle terribly behind the scenes with sleeplessness and depression, but they fight through it all just to live a normal life and contribute to society. There's a lot of people like that. Not everybody turns into a narcissist or a sociopath who gets abused. Most people don't. Most people build their way into some level of functionality. And so the person who has a relatively nice childhood, they're not a bad person. They just can't, like their brain just takes that experience and just erases the really intense bad parts and compresses it into, well, maybe the mom was telling the truth. Like maybe the dad did have a drinking problem, and but maybe the guy tripped and fell down the stairs. And yeah, it doesn't sound good, but I don't know. Eh. Yeah. Is it uncomfortable for you? What do you think it was like for the person who grew up in it? This is how we gaslight victims. And this is how and why it's difficult for people to talk about their trauma. And this is why people who have lived through trauma like this have very few places. Even therapists will gaslight them and be dismissive. At the most intense levels of trauma, there are lots of therapists who also don't know how to deal with it. And they'll get clinical and they'll get in their head and be like, well, okay, you have these experiences, so this is the, you're going to have to work on this and that. It's like, no, shut up, man. You don't understand the horror and hell that this person has lived through. Just start there. Just start there. Maybe just own that. You know what? I didn't have your experiences. And if I'm really honest with you, I'm a therapist. I'm good at empathizing. And I also have to be really honest that I didn't live through what you lived through. And I think you probably have experienced things and are experiencing things that I understand intellectually and I'm skilled at dealing with. But you're going to recognize I have some limitations in my understanding of what you lived through. That is such a relief to that person to have someone just be honest. Just be honest. Don't compress it into your experience and then erase what they actually lived through and survived. And also don't pretend, don't fake it. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, yeah, must be so hard. You know, how many clients come to me and complain about therapists who do this? I can't really do it. My neck is so tight. But they turn their head sideways. Yeah. Stop faking. That doesn't help anybody. People hate it. I do sometimes because you get tired and you get in your head, but come back to the human, come back to the human, come back to the human, and just be honest about who you are in relationship to that person's suffering. Then you can offer the psychological skills, the therapeutic skills, the things that can be done, right? But just be human and be honest. You didn't live through what they did and you don't completely understand their suffering. Just start there. So I've sort of actually naturally transitioned into, rather than ranting and raving and calling people assholes for not understanding trauma, maybe I should talk about what a good way to approach, right? Let's say you had a decent childhood or a pretty good childhood, or a childhood with some issues, but it wasn't that, right? First, when you see pretty severe outcomes, nobody invents that, even if they can't talk about it, even if they worship their parents, especially if they worship their parents, because narcissistic parents brainwash that into their kids. They brainwash in the shiny, all I ever did was take care of you. I sacrificed everything for you. That's a narcissist. Shut up. No parent who loves their kids and is really connected to their kids sits there and tries to convince them how much you sacrificed to raise them. It's a shitty message. Guilt bullshit. First, understand that the symptoms tell you the story. You don't need to make up some shit in your head about, well, they're probably pretty sensitive, or like there might have been some, genetic predisposition to mental illness. Well, oh, yeah, the chemical imbalance. Oh, yeah, big pharma? Is that what it is? Chemical imbalance? Jackasses. Just start with the symptoms tell you how bad it was. The symptoms tell you how bad it was. And in fact, they don't even tell you how bad it was because many people fight desperately day in and day out, year in and year out, to put together a functional life so that no one would ever know what they lived through. That's true more often than you looking and going, wow, that person just spun out. They had a fucked up childhood. They've been in and out of mental hospitals. They've had addiction, and they are, quite frankly, have a difficulty just functioning. That's not as common as people fighting desperately day in and day out so that society doesn't have to bear the cost of what was done to them. So instead, their brain and their body bears all the cost, and it is a heavy, heavy, heavy burden. So the symptom tells you the truth. You don't need a narrative. Number two, if the person doesn't remember their childhood or has difficulty with the narrative, or their time jumps around, or it seems kind of glassy or abstract, that tells you trauma, 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 trauma. They were bathed in adrenaline and cortisol often enough that their brain just started going, I'm bailing, man. I can't. Right? Third, when someone has those symptoms and they say stuff like, well, my dad was pretty rough, I guess, blah, blah, blah. You need to just wait. It's not your job. But if you're the therapist, or if you're a friend, or if you're just interested in the human condition and you want to know, you got to wait. And it's going to take a long time to build the kind of trust to where that person who's buried some of it themselves will be able to come out and say, this, and that happened. When they say it, if you catch yourself thinking, yeah, but stop, don't do it. The fact that it makes you uncomfortable and you want to compress it into your experience, you're not a bad person. That's a natural response, but you have to understand that that does enormous damage to that victim. If that victim honored you by attempting to communicate to you the hell that they experienced, don't besmirch it by getting uncomfortable and trying to compress it into what your experience was. Were you sure it didn't? Yeah, but that seems off. Like your parents are really nice. Like, or even if you don't know the parents, really, like, but I'm sure they loved you. I'm sure they loved you. That is self-serving. You're saying that to reassure yourself. No, that person's parents did not love them. There are parents who don't love their kids. It's okay. It's a fact. You might not like it. It might make you feel disturbed, but it's a fact. There are parents who don't love their kids. There are parents who hate their kids. There are parents who abuse and hurt their kids and take pleasure in it and do it over that child's whole lifetime. Whole childhood for sure, and lifetime if they maintain contact. This is way more common than you think it is. So if you're the person in that position, just be honest. I feel really bad. I feel really bad for you, man. I got to be honest with you. Like, I didn't experience those things, and I don't even know how to wrap my head around the pain and suffering you went through. And so that's all I can do is be honest with you and tell you I'm sorry and I care, and I don't know what to say. That's it. Done. You don't have to be somebody's therapist. You don't have to offer help, right? Those people have been through so much bullshit. They don't want somebody just like, well, have you tried talking to them about it? Yeah. The dad who erupts into rage and punches and hits and says, you're a fucking worthless piece of shit, and throws his own 11-year-old son down the stairs and breaks his arm and doesn't give a shit and lies about it. Yeah, you want to go talk to that guy? Well, but maybe he changed. Like, all that's your wishful thinking. That's your wishful thinking. You wish. I can tell you as a therapist, the number of times that kind of parent has an honest come to Jesus moment, any time in their lifetime, is so rare. And the few times it happens, it tends to happen on their deathbed or when they know they're dying, and suddenly they'll call them in and say, I treated you pretty badly, and I feel bad about that. And that's it. That's the best that person gets. They get gaslit, and their parents lie about what happened to them. And society gaslights them and lies about what happened to them and says your symptoms are caused by you and you were the problem. And then maybe if they win the lottery on their parent's deathbed, the parent will acknowledge. And that has huge healing power, which is why it's so hurtful that parents lie and gaslight. Because parents have such power that even without going public, if they would just go to the child that they abuse and say, I abused you really badly, and you had terrible outcomes and you struggle with what I did to you and it was not your fault and I'm sorry I did it. That has massive healing power. But parents who abuse that badly are so ashamed of what they've done that they will lie through their teeth until the day they die. If they are believers, if they're Christians, they will risk hell rather than admit what they did. That's common amongst abusive parents, right? Not among parents in general. So, A, recognize the symptoms. They tell you how bad the abuse was, right? B, recognize when someone's having difficulty with the narrative, it's not because they're full of shit. It's because that's how bad it was and they were bathed in cortisol and adrenaline, especially if they don't remember at all. That's how bad it was. It was really bad. That's B. C, don't try to compress it into your experience if you were not badly neglected or abused. Just accept that it feels disturbing to you and you don't know what to do and you don't know what to say and you don't know how to wrap your head around it. And just say that. I feel for you, man. I care. I feel honored that you shared this with me, but I didn't experience those things and I literally don't know what to say. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm so limited. That's it. That person will weep for relief that you aren't one more person who's completely full of shit when they try to talk about what happened to them. That you don't actively try to gaslight them or ask questions where you act like, oh, well, I'm just exploring. I just wanted to explore your experience. But you're asking questions clearly searching for evidence that it wasn't what they said it was. But isn't it sort of weird that, but aren't you sure that, blah, 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 like even the tone and the way of asking questions, that victim already knows, they've already heard all those questions. They know why you're asking that. You're asking that because you don't want it to actually be as bad as it was. So all you're doing is erasing what they lived through because it's uncomfortable for you. That's a shitty, selfish thing to do. Don't do that. Well, I think I've said what I meant to say. Cussed a lot, which I enjoy. I hope it doesn't offend you. Or maybe it does, whatever. Anyway, don't gaslight the victims. Understand that there are way more people who are badly, badly abused and neglected and gaslit by their parents. Parents, those kind of parents will lie through their teeth till the day they die. And that happens way more often than you think. And those people go through life alone, knowing that they had very, very significant, very painful experiences, knowing that they survived those experiences and that should be to their credit, but no one credits it to them because people are just like, well, we don't think what you say happened to you happened to you. What happened to you, we don't think it did. Therefore, any negative mental health outcomes and negative life outcomes, it's just you. It's just because you're a loser. They don't say that explicitly, but it's implied, right? You have issues, it's just you're just blaming the parents. You just don't want to work hard enough. All right, you guys. I love you. I'll talk to you next time. Have a good afternoon. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.